everything, no? So there is no...
Yeah. That is, we received the email, so we...
Oh, right. Okay.
Invite everybody.
And the Moodle, there's a Moodle also created. I have just seen only very few people, only 3 people have registered. So others also, if you can go and enroll to the Moodle module, then because the lecture note will be uploaded there.
Okay, madam.
When you have time, just go and enroll after me. Not immediately, but after that. Okay, then I'll start sharing and give me a minute. Can you see the slides?
Yes, madam, we can see.
Okay. So before going to the slide, I'll just tell the main area that I will be covering. Because this lecture, the sustainable development, it will be done by 3 lecturers. One is myself, and I think you are going to start from Dr. Sachi as well from tomorrow, if I'm not wrong. So that is also part of this module, but there are different sections. So when it's come to the examination, you will have 3 sections in the exam paper from each lecturers, the areas covered by different lecturers. Okay, so that is how it usually conducted. So as long as that my part is concerned, I'll be mainly focusing on this carbon emission and reduction, and then project management related this carbon emission. So the major area is carbon emission and reduction. And I'll be also touching the project management for carbon emission and reduction as part of it. The second key area is the project safety and health management, right? Health and safety. And the third key area will be green rating system for built environment, right? So those are the three major areas that will be covered by myself. So I will upload you a detailed area under the subtopics that will be covered after these major areas. So when it's come to the final examination, there will be 3 questions from me from all of these 3 areas. Okay, so that is one thing. And Dr. Sachi will be doing, if I can remember, she'll be doing something on the project management side. And there will be a small part done by Professor Lalit D. Silva. So that is on, if I can rightly remember, it's environment impact assessment, right? But anyway, those lecturers will tell you exactly what they are going to cover for you. But as far as my lectures are concerned, the main parts will be related to carbon emission, project management for carbon emission and reduction, project safety and health management, and green building rating system. Mainly, we are going to look at the green building rating system in Sri Lanka. Okay, so those are the overall coverage of the lectures, right? So then I'll just share the slides with you. Okay, so before that, do you want me to record and upload? We usually did that during the COVID time. After that, we stopped doing it. If everyone is here, then I don't really need to record the session and upload it. Or do you think it will be really useful? Otherwise, because for anyone who are not present here, I don't know whether it is necessary. If you request only, I will do that. Roshal, do you have any idea on that? What is happening with the other?
Yeah, better, madam, because usually most of the time our students will be working. Yeah, so better if it can be done.
All right. Okay. Then what I will do is, because there is a small issue with me recording and uploading and keep it forever on Moodle, because we have a limited capacity, because the file become Fusion, the DMS, the data management system allows us a limited capacity. So what I will do is, I will upload the recording and keep it for a week. Okay. So if you need the recording to be saved, you have to go and click the link and download it to your personal computers, because after 1 week, the recording will be disappear. Okay, that okay, that arrangement? Because I don't have enough
space. Fine, madam.
Yeah, okay. As long as you have that message, I'll anyway upload it to the Moodle, keep it for a week for you to download, okay? All right, then I'll start the recording as well.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so as part of today's lecture, then what I'm going to focus is the first area that I talked about, the carbon emission and reduction, right? So probably it is not a very, new topic that you already would have heard, not technically though, but we are dealing with this in our day-to-day life, right? But probably you would not have studied that technically, what is carbon emission or the carbon footprint and those technical terms. But when it's come to our day-to-day activities, and you cannot really avoid, contributing to carbon emission or contributing to carbon reduction. So as part of the sustainable development, before we move on to the green rating system, which is comparatively the large area of study as part of our syllabus is concerned, but this is one of the key important areas, carbon emission and reduction. Okay, so that is the topic that we are going to discuss today. Before jumping straight away to the carbon emission, I would like to, just first start about the broader picture, or give you the broader picture, which is starting with sustainable development, right? So can anybody contribute what do you understand by sustainable development? So it doesn't have to be a definition, or I'm not asking you a definition or a technical definition. So based on your understanding, even if you haven't studied that at all before, what do you understand? Because that is a topic which is, it's a hot topic which is discussed in almost every context these days, right? Across the world, right? So what do you understand by sustainable development? Any volunteers who can just tell me what do you mean by sustainable development, or what do you understand the term? How do you define, or how do you tell that? Anyone? You can unmute your mic and you can talk, or you can send your answers in the chat box, whichever is comfortable with you.
We have to ensure to use the natural resources effectively and efficiently in order to save it for future generations.
Yes, that's very good. That's one way of understanding. So sustainable development is we are ensuring the sustainability of the natural resources to be used by the future generation. What else? What are the other key terms that comes into your mind when you say sustainable development? Green development, yes. Rally Mohammed, yes, that's correct. So it is something to do with the green. So when you say sustainable development, then we immediately think about something green. Okay, that's very good. Anything else? Any other keyword associated with sustainable development that you understand? Social environment economics, yes, that is another thing which we cannot avoid when talking about sustainable development. Then we have to always think about social, economic, and environment. So those are the three key pillars of sustainability. Yes. Consider the environment, economic, and social equity. Yeah, few students are giving that answer. Reduction of carbon emission, very clever, Ratnayaka. Yes, that's the lecture is all about today. Reduction of carbon emission in development. Yeah, solution for scarce resources. So we are trying to, so can you elaborate on that, Jay Singh? What do you mean by solution for scarce resources? Is it to minimize the use of scarce resources? Is that what you mean? Sorry, dear. I think I lost you. So that was not clear. So yes, solution for, I understand that the scarce resources are getting scarce day by day. So we have to find a solution in order to minimize so that the resources will be sufficient to be utilized for our future generation as defined by sustainable development. Okay, I think most of you have captured the key terms that are used with the sustainable development. So when it's come to the development, so that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay, so this was the definition given by. So when you when I asked that, so the Rochelle mainly mentioned saving the resources for future generations. So what you do is, we all have our right to use the resources in this world, but we have to be considerate about using the resources, because by using the resources today, we cannot compromise the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs, right? So generally, when you say sustainable development, means we have to ensure that whatever the resources that we are utilizing right now, it's not going to reduce or compromise or make them compromise their ability to meet their own needs, because every human being have the right to meet their own needs, right? So when it's come to the sustainable development, this is one of the hot topics these days, right? If you refer back to like 20 years ago, right? To be precise, 30 years ago, even there are a lot of sustainability. The concept of sustainability was there even 3 decades, 4 decades ago, right? But at the same time, people did not really realize how significant the sustainable development is, right? So that realization actually came when you dated like 20 years back, right? So one of the reasons is because we have now started realizing the impact of inefficient use of resources that are happening around the world, right? So earlier days, we didn't realize because the impact was not very much visible, because the impact are slowly coming, right? But nowadays, the impact is there. So can you give me one example for an impact of a non-properly utilizing the resources or inefficiently utilizing the resources? What could be a visible impact that is happening these days? What do you understand by impact? Impact is like something that we realize, okay, something is wrong in this earth. Heat wave, yes. So the heat wave, even if you consider the Sri Lankan climate, it has been changed, right? 20 years back, we never had temperature. We never had temperature which is more than, I think, more 30 maximum. So, but now these days it is generally the temperature of Sri Lanka has, and on average it has increased, right? And you can think about the disasters, right? So when it's come to the disaster, I mean, what I'm talking about, the natural disasters because of the climate change. The natural disasters are in terms of the intensity, in terms of the frequency, it is considerably high compared to, we'll say, 20 years back, right? So those are actually the impact of the improper utilization of the resources. So we are disturbing the earth too much, or we are disturbing the resources, or because of the activities that are conducted by the human being. It is very much difficult for us to even, after the disaster happens, it's very much difficult for us to address that, right? So it will become too late if we don't act now, because it has already become too late for certain things. Therefore, it is very, very important. That is one of the reasons, because the impact are very visible, because in the natural disasters and all, the frequency is almost every other month there is a disaster. Somewhere around the world it is happening, right? Those days it is not that much visible because we didn't have that much disaster, very frequent disaster. Okay, so therefore, what we need to realize is that is one of the reasons why even in the educational system, now we are teaching sustainable development. When it's come to an industry, any industrial development, now they are talking about green and environmental friendly development. Right? So everything, every aspect, we are trying to incorporate the sustainable development because we have already started realizing the impact of the sustainable, the lack of, consideration to the sustainable development. We have started realizing the impact. So why we are talking more about sustainability, then I have already mentioned, we are talking about sustainable development, and also we will come to the green building, right? So the green building, the term green is something to related to sustainability. I think the students have already picked up in the message text, when I asked about the sustainability. Some of you have already mentioned it's all about green, right? The reason that we call it as a green, it's not like physically green. The green means it's more natural, more related to the environment, more environmental friendly, right? So the minimum impact it will give to the environment, minimum negative impact it is going to give you to the environment. So that is actually called a green building, right? So we have to talk about, so there are so many other terms, and we can talk about the carbon reduction, energy efficiency, green building, circular economy, right? And sustainability, sustainable development. Those are the words that you will come across in your day-to-day activities, day-to-day reading and development, because we are trying to incorporate this sustainable development in every activity, every major industrial activities or our daily routine in order to make it more environmental friendly. So the average global, one of the things, so the heat wave, one of the students have already mentioned about the heat wave, which is one of the key impacts, right? So the average global temperature is increasing rapidly. So what do you think would be the effect? So what happened when the heat wave increases? How that is going to affect us, because it's already happening in Sri Lanka. So you can realize that we are using a lot of air conditioning these days in Sri Lanka, because when you think about like a situation 20 years back, right? Or even, 20 years back, it's very rare people have air conditioning installed in their houses, right? We used to have air conditioning only in the offices and major buildings and shopping complexes. But now when you look at it, almost every single house, individual houses, they cannot, the most of the houses have air conditioning. They cannot survive because the heat is now too much. You can feel the temperature which has increased. Okay, so what do you think would happen when the global temperature is increasing rapidly? How it is going to affect so one is the heat wave, okay, so that you have already mentioned. What are the other huge effect of a global warming? Any idea what it is going to do to the earth? You cannot think of an impact of a global ozone depletion. Yes, that is one thing. That's because of the carbon emissions and all. Right. So the global warming, one thing is it's creating climate changes, because if you can observe the climate change pattern, right? Earlier days, we have a pattern for a climate change. So we can say, okay, it's going to rain these months of the year, right? Flooding. Yes, that's very good. So that's another impact. That's how I was going to tell that, right? The disasters. So the climate change is something, the climate change pattern, if you review the climate change pattern, the pattern is very unnatural these days, right? So unexpectedly, so during the winter season, there is a hot weather. During the summer season, there is snow, right? So if you can observe the patterns in other countries and even in Sri Lanka, you can see that our weather patterns have changed. It's not regular now. It is very irregular. We cannot expect what is going to be the weather during these months. Earlier days, it was not like that. Usually, you have a very good pattern, like during December, November, December, and January, it's raining. So it's raining. But now, all the year, sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's very hot. So the pattern is very confused. The climate is very confused way. It has changed. So one of the reasons for the climate change, the global warming is contributing to the climate change. Right. So one student, so Jayenda has mentioned flood. So one of the reasons for that is the sea level rise. Right. So when you look at the global warming, it creates two major effects. One is it increasing the temperature on the earth. Right. And because of that, the rise of sea level. Right. So the sea levels are rising because of the thermal expansion of the ocean. Right. So when the temperature increases because of the thermal expansion of the ocean, the sea level is rising. In addition, the icebergs, right, which is when the temperature increases, usually what happens to the ice, it melts. Okay. So during the places where there are ice, because of the global warming, when the iceberg starts melting, what it will affect, can finally contribute is to increase the sea levels. Okay, so these are the major impact of global warming. So the temperature on the earth temperature is naturally going up, and it also creates the sea levels to rise. So the changes in temperature and precipitation pattern increases, the frequency, duration, intensity, and other extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, heat waves, and tornadoes. Right? So the pattern also, in terms of the frequency, it's happening very frequently. The disasters are happening very frequently. Right? And the duration, sometimes it stays for a long time. Right? And the intensity, it says the magnitude of the impact. Right? Right? So those are the things. So like floods and droughts and all sort of different weather climate changes are all the effects of the global warming. So when you look at the consequences of global warming, you can see when the temperature is going up on Earth, the countries which already have hot weathers, right? There is, temperature high means you can see from the picture, this kind of an effect will come, right? No water, and the earth is breaking because of the hot weather. If you look at that, the icebergs, when the temperature is high, then this will melt and it will ultimately increase the sea level. That is going to affect so many other species which lives in sea or which depends on the, its livelihood is in sea. So think about these penguins, for example. So all these ice melt. Where do they go? Disasters, the flooding and landslides and all sort of disasters will occur because of the climate change and because of the global warming. So the weather pattern change, it will create a improper climate change, and that will in turn create disasters. Right. Earthquakes, even the earthquakes the frequency of earthquakes in some parts of the world have changed and increased because of the disturbance that it has beneath the earth. Right. So because we are disturbing the nature too high, okay, too frequently. So it started reacting back now. Right. So this actually from a couple of years ago, there was a huge volcano eruption in Congo. That's again a consequence of a global warming. So do you think you are a contributor in a global warming. So when you say global warming, so you might say, okay, whether you have any part to play, or do you think it's totally outside your concern and you have nothing to do with this? Because the temperature is increasing as the way it is increasing, but I have nothing to do with that. So how many of you, can you put your hands up? Or you know how to put the hands up, raise hand. How many of you think that you are a contributor of global warming? You are responsible for global warming. Only one? Brinda is the only one who thinks that she's okay. There are more. Okay, roughly, yeah, 1/4. Okay, you all can lower the hands now. So how many of you think that you have nothing to do with the global warming? It is not your responsibility. Anyone who thinks that you have, it is not your responsibility, you are not contributing to the global warming. Okay, no one thinks like that. Okay, that's good, at least, because it is true that we are directly or indirectly contributing in global warming, and we will see how we are going to understand that concept. So you have to feel whether you are, what type of person you are. You are more towards, so when you can see this picture, it's one side, it's so more green, and the nature is there as the prominent features there. On the other side, it's becoming more red, right? And it has more developments there, right? Industrials and all sort of developments there. So less nature, more nature, right? But we are sort of in the middle because we cannot completely avoid this side, right? We cannot completely go back to the Stone Age and do everything without having any development. So that is anyway not possible, not practical, right? But at the same time, we cannot completely go to that side as also, completely ignoring the nature, right? So you have to think, where do you want to put yourself? Are you an environmental friendly person? You want to put yourself here, or you want to put yourself there? You don't bother about the environment no matter what. All you need is the developments and the revolutions. But most of the people actually stand sort of in the middle, right? They don't want to lose this and they still want that, okay? So we all are in a situation where we want to have the cake and eat the cake. It's like that we want both, right? But there should be a balance, because when you increasingly use this side of it, side of the development, there is definitely a depletion from this side, right? So if you wanted to give more and more nature and we wanted to go very green and all, then there will be a small impact on that side of the development, right? So how do you maintain the balance is the crucial thing. And you have to feel that we are contributing to both sides. So we are contributing to help the environment. At the same time, we are contributing to damage the environment. So that is kind of a situation that the human beings are in this world because of the all sort of development that is happening around us. right? Even though we cannot have a direct control over it, okay, we cannot stop the temperature or reduce the temperature by magic or anything. So, but in our day-to-day activity, what we are doing, what we wear, what our work life, the lifestyle of us, everything has some sort of an impact on the environment all the time, right? So every single human being in this earth are a contributor to global warming, right? So to how much we contribute will actually help us to define whether we are more towards the destruction side or whether we are more towards saving the earth side. Because we have to live in this world, so we need resources, right? Without resources, you cannot basically live, right? So we need buildings, we need to education, we need to travel. For that, we need to take our car or motorbike or the public transport, whatever, right? All these are essential needs for us. So all the resources that you use in your everyday life have an impact on the planet, right? When we want to put up a house, for example, so we'll start with the minimum, just a domestic use. Everyone would like to have their own house built, right? So when you want to build a house, right, you don't build the house using, the tree leaves and all or sand like earlier days. Usually we are using the house these days using bricks or blocks, or we don't use timber that much in Sri Lanka, but usually we have the usual construction material. The concrete, cement, and all sort of materials are used, right? There are very few, I don't think that domestic houses are there. So very few environmental friendly materials are used to build the entire house, right? So there are certain construction which is done completely out of the environmental friendly material, but that is not usually happening, and that is sometimes it is not practically possible for you to live in the houses like that. So when you put up a house for you, what you do is, whether like it or not, whether you don't like it, you have to extract the resources from the earth, and somehow you are contributing to the environmental depletion or environmental damage, and that in turn will turn into a global warming. So you will become part of the contributor to global warming. Right? So the more you increase your development, so your everyday needs and further development, it makes the ecological footprint bigger and bigger, right? So we will use the ecological footprint is how much damage that you're using. It's kind of a measure. So when you say carbon footprint, how much of, carbon emission that is happening because of your activity. Right? In very simple term, if I have to define. Right? So how much of ecological damage or environmental damage that your day-to-day activities or your activities are, because of your activities, how much damage is created. Right? So the more you do, the more bigger your ecological footprint will be. Right? So even though we don't directly feel like, or sometimes we don't realize, okay, we are global warming, we are part of the responsible, but everyone who is living in this earth, one way or the other, become the contributors of global warming. Because we are utilizing the resources more than what is needed, actually. Okay, so one of the recent research, what they have identified is we are using 1.5 planet to get the resources we consume. That means we are in one planet, but the resources that we are consuming is like we are getting it from 1.5 planet. In other words, we are actually getting more than what is available or what a planet can afford to give you. We are actually extracting more from the earth. So when you take more, what will happen is to regenerate the resources, it will take more time. Okay. So some resources is easy for you to use or you can destroy, but it will take a lot of time to rebuild, right? Think about a tree, the basic, easiest example, right? So if you want to cut the tree to make something, we'll say a carpentry, whatever, the furniture or whatever, you can cut the tree and immediately you can convert that into a furniture. But if you want to grow the tree back, it won't happen in a day, right? It will take ages for you to grow a tree. So that is why we have to have this balance. So usually what they advise is if you want to cut one tree, then you have to at least plant few trees, right? Probably at least for the future generation. So when you are destroying one tree, then you are planting few trees. So what you are trying to do is you are making it more sustainable, right? Without cutting the tree, you cannot sometimes achieve whatever your need. So it is necessary for you to cut the tree, then plant the tree somewhere else. So that's what the environmentalists are telling the people. So when you cut somewhere, you have to grow somewhere else. So that will help the future generation to utilize that resource in future. So just to summing up, what did you learn so far? One thing that you need to understand is, so when it's come to the sustainable development as a broader term, right? We have talked about the global warming and the climate change are the two key things under the sustainable development that has some negative impacts. So the global warming is one of the reasons for the sea level rise and the increased temperature on the earth. And again, the global warming is contributing to unnatural climatic conditions as well. Right? And what else we learned is we as human beings who are utilizing the resources of the earth from various times of the year for our day-to-day needs is one way or the other, we are contributing. One way or other, we are contributing to the global warming, right? Even though you don't realize that, or even though you don't want to, no one wants to contribute to the global warming, right? Because we don't want to damage the environment, but it is sometimes unavoidable. Right now, what we are using, sorry, Jayasinghe, I think we cannot hear you. Can others hear me, or is the problem is from me? Can others hear what he was talking? For me, it is...
Maybe it's a mistakenly mic on, madam. We can hear you, madam.
Okay, no. I thought Jayasinghe was talking earlier also. When he was talking, that noise came. So I don't know whether he was trying to tell something. Anyway. If you want to tell anything, Jayasinghe, you can send it through the text because I think your mic has some issues. Okay, so what did you learn is, one thing is that we all need to understand that we are contributing to global warming. So we cannot escape that, okay, I have not done anything wrong to this environment, so I am not a contributor. You cannot say that, right? Even right now, I am using the computer. I'm in the office in Moratuwa with the AC is running, right? While we are using the lectures, we are using the electricity. So if you are using your PC is plugged on, you're using the electricity. So we are contributing. Okay. So we all are contributors, but to what extent we can contribute, how we can reduce the damage, because it cannot be avoidable. As I mentioned, our day-to-day life, we have to do certain things. So how So how we can minimize that damage? So we know that we cannot avoid, but at least we can be considerate. But sometimes some people are not even bothered, right? So they keep the lights on throughout the day. Even during the daytime, they use the electricity. They keep the lights on, right? So if you are doing that at home, probably you can change yourself, because you can change at the domestic level, right? You're not going to you can't, directly say, okay, I'm going to reduce the global warming by this much. You don't have to do that. At least at your level, as an individual, we will try to be more considerate towards the environment. So when we are utilizing the energies, right, unnecessary. So if you have a shop which is in a walking distance, then don't take the cars out, right? So it's good as an exercise, and it's good for the environment. So how many of us are thinking about it is the issue. Give me a second. Okay, no problem. Sorry. Okay, so we have to change ourselves, and we have to be more considerate in order to minimize the contribution that we can make towards the global warming by thinking about our day-to-day activities, right? So that can be done by the individuals. So that is something that we have to think and do for ourselves. In that way, what you can do is you can still be a contributor, but at least you can be more considerate towards the environment. So therefore, your contribution towards the global warming can be minimized. Okay. So then now we will move on to the technical part of the lecture, which is the carbon emission and assessment and reduction. Right. So what we are going to discuss there is the concept of carbon footprint and carbon emission. And what are the different types of carbon footprint and assessment? And what will be the carbon reduction strategies? So those are the main things probably I'll cover today. And then tomorrow, the project management for carbon reduction and project management plan for carbon emission and reduction. Okay, so that mainly we are going to look at all these topics under the carbon emission assessment and reduction. Okay, do you have anything to say or do you have any questions up to now? Because this subject is not a hard subject for you to learn and understand, because you already know these, because it's nothing, new, or which is, we already are into this situation. Only thing is I'm just highlighting explicitly the impact and the contributions and what we are doing and how we can avoid. Other than that, this sustainable development is something that you have to realize in your day-to-day life. Okay, so if you have any questions or anything to be discussed or any comment that you want to make, please unmute your mic and speak up. Okay, I don't have any issues, so if you can disturb me at any time in order to clarify things. Okay, now if we say the carbon footprint, right? Anyone who are aware of the term or who have heard about the carbon footprint? Hope you have already come across that term, but did you understand what it is, or do you know what does that mean? Have you heard about the term carbon footprint? No? Okay, we'll look at it then. So is it a new topic? Have you studied as part of any other modules about this topic? What I mean is this is semester 3, semester 1 and 2. Any modules that have you studied anything related to sustainable development, or is it the first time that you are studying this module? Can someone confirm that at least? I mean, as part of this MSc, I'm asking.
This is the first time, madam.
This is the first time, no?
Yeah.
This module. Okay. I just wanted to know because. Okay, so when it comes to the carbon footprint, right? So before going to the definition, so we'll look at the background. So because we use energy in our everyday activities, right? Starting from turning on a light or switch at home to driving to school or traveling to abroad. For the daily activities that we are doing, we use energy, right? So most of this energy, right, it can be electricity or transport or fuel burning. Most of this energy Sarangi, yes. Measure the emission of carbon and related greenhouse gases. Yes, that's exactly its carbon footprint. It's kind of a measuring how much of CO2 or how much of this greenhouse gases are emitted or because of a particular activity, right? Then we calculate that and then we measure that as a carbon footprint. That is correct, yes. So the most of the energy is derived from burning fossil fuels, right? So when you say fossil fuels, that is, fossil fuels are, I'll come to that in a minute. So what happens is when you're using this energy, because these energies will be derived from the burning fossil fuels, and when you're burning that fossil fuels, what happens is it releases some gases, right? So the gases we usually call as greenhouse gases, but there are different types of gases under that, right? The CO2 is very popular and easily we can understand, and it is one of the most dangerous GHG, the greenhouse gases. Okay, so whenever you are using an energy, because of the burning of fossil fuels, and because when it burns, it releases the gases, greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere. Every time when you are using an energy, you are contributing, you are emitting the greenhouse gases, right? So the current consumption of fossil fuels releases more than 25 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year, right? So this is just a rough calculation. So there's no, very firm measurements there. But generally I have just given this information just to think about the extent of damage it can create to the atmosphere or the environment every year, right? So when it's come to the fossil fuels, it's actually when you the animal waste, the plant waste decomposting, right? And these fossil fuels are decomposed for millions of years, right? And then these fuels are found in Earth crust, and it contains the carbon, hydrogen, and the energy, so the gases which are burned for energy, right? So these are the examples. So the coal, oil, and natural gases are examples of fossil fuels. So in order to create these fossil fuels, it takes millions of years because it comes from the natural plants and animal waste going to the earth, and it will settle there for so many million years, and it is turned into fuels. And what we do is we simply dig that out and we burn that in order to use that as an energy, right? So in order to create the fossil fuels, or to creating the fossil fuels takes millions of years, but utilizing that, we are utilizing is too fast. So you can actually rematch that. It's something like growing a tree again, right? It actually takes more time than growing a tree. But we depends on the energy for our day-to-day activities, right? And especially on fossil fuels for many of the things we use, right? We depend on the energy. So what will happen is, so whenever you are using the energy, then it burns when you are switching on an air conditioning, it burns energy, right? So the carbon emission will be there. Okay. And almost all the activities or all the thing that we are doing is made out of some material or some chemicals, which will again made out of this fossil fuels. So in order to produce various things, also the fossil fuels are used, right? So when you look at the fossil fuels, the usage to heat our home. So if you're putting up a heater or an air conditioning, run now your vehicles, electricity, plants, industry, and manufacturing. So it can be at the industrial level, manufacturing level, or at the domestic level, right? To make the medicines, the pharmaceutical companies, most of the medicines are used, the fossil fuels are used, cosmetics, plastic, fabrics, and lubricants, right? So how did you attend the lecture today? So now it is, you are sitting comfortably at your homes and using your computer. But think about a pre-pandemic situation. When there is a lecture, all these MSc students, they travel from various places, and some come from very far places. So sometimes they drive, sometimes they take a public transport. There are only very few who walk. Only those who live near to Moratuva University only will walk. All others will be traveling using various vehicles. So what you do is you all are burning energies. When you're traveling, the fuel, it's directly burning the oil, right? Even if you brush your teeth, you use the product, the toothpaste is made from the fossil fuels. So every single material that we are using in our day-to-day life can be our fabric, cosmetics, medicines, and even toothpaste. Some way or the other, the fossil fuels are involved, right? So but we can't stop brushing. So everyone is brushing, and every time when the toothpaste are run over, we go and buy the new toothpaste. That's how we do. We don't think about, okay, buying a toothpaste is somehow we are trying to contribute to the fossil fuel. That means every product, when they are making all these products, they're extracting the fossil fuels from the earth. So the more you extract, the more damage that you're doing to the environment. This can give you a little bit of, indication. So even though it is not very latest, there is 2019, now we are in 2023. But still, I think you can see the three major fossil fuels, gas, oil, and coal. The global consumption, that means how much it has been utilized or used up, right? So you can see that it was very low, right? 1800, if you dated back 1800, but from 1900, we started using coal was there, right? Right. And from 1950 around time, the oil usage has been there, and now the gas, right? So you can see the consumption has increased day by day. Give me a second. Okay, thanks, Dinesh. Sorry about that. Okay, and the use of energy. So use of energy, we are using energy with our day-to-day activity. Okay, watching TV, even phone, mobile phone. Every one of us having mobile phone, and we are charging that using electricity. So all these fossil fuel for energy generation is there, the use of energy. So what is the connection between energy and CO2? When you use this energy, what you are using is, because when you are using the electricity or the transport or manufacturing or whatever the energy that you are using, what you do is, by using the energy, you are releasing the greenhouse gases. Okay, so that is the energy. So the more energy that you use, the more CO2 that you release. So that is the connection between energy and CO2. Well, that's why we usually tell, so if you want to be more environment friendly, so you can see nowadays when you receive emails, at the end of the email, it says, do not print unless otherwise it's absolutely necessary. Because when you do a printing, right, you're using the paper, you are using the printer, you are using the cartridge, and you are using the electricity. Okay, so a lot of fossil fuels are involved there. So taking a printout is contributing to the environment. Right? So that is the connection. So we have to minimize the unnecessary usage of energy whenever there is a possibility, right? Whenever there is light, you don't need to switch on the lights. Whenever there is a natural light, right? So the green building constructions nowadays, what they do is they have to design the building in such a way. So during the daytime, there is no need to put on lights. It also depends on the design, because sometimes they think about the directions where the sunlight is, sun rising, sun setting, which direction, and which way the windows should be designed. Right? So when you have the windows and the roof lights, and the green buildings are now giving more consideration for those kind of design, so that you will minimize the use of the energy even after you have finished building. When you're occupied in the building, that your energy consumption will be minimized because of the design of the building. You receive more natural lighting and natural ventilation to the houses. So that is something called green, right? So you can see the connection between the energy and the CO2. So the more energy that you use, the more CO2 that you release. So the disadvantage, we have already looked at what the fossil fuel, when you are using that, what damage it can make to the environment. So the burning of coal and petroleum produces a lot of pollutants causing air pollution, right? So even the air is now, nowadays we don't get that air pollution is increasing. So that means, because this is one of the, we can always think, okay, there is no end for the air because we always receive air, right? Something like the natural light, the sunlight, something like the wind. The air is also one of the renewable energy because we always get air. But nowadays what they tell is, the environmentalist, the getting a pure air is very difficult because of the pollution, because of the air pollution. There are a lot of pollutants in the air. So therefore, then we can't say, okay, this is a very natural fresh air that we are breathing. Probably it's not the case. In years to come, even breathing a fresh air will be a problem. Because what you're trying to do is that all these gases are finally ended up in air. So that will become the ozone depletion that one of the students mentioned. That's because of the CO2, the air pollution. Right? So just imagine a situation where the air which is surrounded by us is not good for breathing. So what we are going to do? Okay, so you have to think about that. So this is again contribute. So when you so you can see the connection between those two, right? So say for example, you even using a toothpaste will finally ended up in breathing a fresh air. Okay, so can you see the connection there? Right? So everything, the fossil fuels related material that we are using and burning is going to finally creating a damage to the environment that we are going to live, right? So most of the people, they don't see this explicit connection between energy and CO2. That's one of the reasons that we are not very much bothered about making the energy efficient manners, right? So energy efficiency is another part of the sustainable development. Okay, using the energy more efficiently. So if you understand the connection between these two, then when we are using the energy, so we will be thinking more towards the environment side of it. Right? So nowadays, when you go to the shop to buy, we'll say air conditioning, there are air conditioning in different ranges and brands and prices, but also it says, okay, the energy efficiency. This is 80% energy efficiency. Some air conditioning are 90% energy efficient. May be expensive, but they're telling, they're branding that as an energy efficient. That means it, in terms of the sound and the energy, it is giving, is considerably low in the sense the wastage of the energy is very minimal there. So all the energy will be used up for the air conditioning to work. There is no waste of energy. If there is a waste of energy, that means there is a CO2 produced as well. So nowadays, the electrical appliances, they are inbuilt this concept, energy efficient appliances. Okay, so they find the mechanism to reduce the unnecessary usage of energy, and they wanted to just use the energy which is just needed for the function to be performed. Right? So that kind of a generators, there are energy efficient generators. Those days, sometimes if we even nowadays, during the power cut times, when there are some shops are putting up generators, you can even hear. You might be like few blocks away, few houses away, but you can still hear the generator, right? So that means the energy is converted into sound, which is not used. We don't need sound for the generator. No? So that's a lot of waste of energy. But nowadays there are generators, even if you run it within your own house, you cannot hear the sound, right? So very less sound. So likewise, the technique have been developed in order to make the appliances more energy efficient, right? Why they are doing it is again to minimize the disadvantage of the fossil fuel. So air pollution is one thing, right? And the fossil fuel release oxides of carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, etc. And that can cause the acid rain, affecting soil fertility and potable water. So that's another thing, because when these gases are mixed up in the air, when it rains, the rainwater also will be more acidity, which we call acid rain, right? Because we usually consider the rainwater is very clean and very good for the trees to grow and all. But when we have too much of pollution in the air, and when it rains, then it causes more acid rain. And then what will happen is that when the acid rain goes to the ground, and it will going to damage or contaminate with the fertility of the soil and the potable water, the water which is naturally saved beneath the ground, which we are using for various purposes, for the tube well or for various purposes, we are getting water from the below ground, isn't it? So what will happen? The chemicals are mixed with that water. So it creates air pollution, and also it pollutes the water, right? And also these carbon dioxide, the gases produced by fossil fuels, it causes the global warming. Okay, so there are disadvantages of fossil fuels. So that is why so it is unavoidable for every single, so what we looked at is, in summary, every single thing that we use, produce, involve these fossil fuels. And when we are using more fossil fuel, when you're extracting more fossil fuels, it's going to damage the environment. When you're burning the fossil fuel, it creates more air pollution, and that will in turn into a water pollution and finally contribute to the global warming as well. Right? Now the definitions, it's already been mentioned by one of the students in the chat box. So the carbon footprint is a measure of the impact that human activities have on the amount of greenhouse gases produced, right? So what is the impact? So because of this particular activity, so we'll say, okay, I am traveling to from home to university to a lecture, and then you can calculate what is the carbon footprint of that activity, right? It depends on if you're walking, 0 carbon footprint, right? If you're taking a bicycle, probably 0 carbon. If you're taking a motorbike, carbon footprint is there, right? If you're taking a car, then it will be more. But while driving the car, you are collecting all your colleagues, maybe 4 other colleagues, and you all are sharing a car. Probably in total effect, the carbon footprint is less because it has to be divided among 5 people, right? Likewise, you can measure the carbon footprint, right? So how much of impact the human activities have on the amount of greenhouse gases produced. If you can measure the impact, then that measure, we call it as the carbon footprint, right? So the carbon footprint can be calculated for various things. It can be calculated for our day-to-day activities, or a particular day, or a particular month, or a particular organization, or for a particular individual. By just studying the routine of an individual, you can say, okay, how much carbon footprint these 2 people are making to the environment. Because someone are very much environmental friendly people, right? They don't want to unnecessarily take the cars out. They walk most of the time, right? They don't want to unnecessarily waste the resources. They don't switch on the light and keep it burn for the whole day. And some people will be the other way around. Even to go to the next door shop, they will take the car. So when you measure the carbon footprint, comparing these 2 kind of people, then you will have more carbon footprint for those who are using the environment, the fossil fuels or the activities, energy without much consideration of the environment, then you will have a high carbon footprint for those people compared to the other type of people. Right? So it basically relates to the amount of greenhouse gases produced in our day-to-day lives. Right? How much of burning fossil fuels for electricity or heating or air conditioning or transport, etc. In our day-to-day life, how much of amount, what is the amount of greenhouse gases that are produced. So that measure is referred as the carbon footprint. That clear? Okay. Greenhouse gases. When you say greenhouse gases, actually there are these 6 gases, right? So these are too technical for you. You don't need to, memorize those. But it is good if you can understand that, right? But the CO2 is one of the greenhouse gases which creates most of the damages, right? It's a nasty gas. So that is why we are talking about CO2 emissions and CO2 calculations and all, right? So the carbon footprint can obtain by calculating the set of CO2 emission which goes directly and indirectly. It can be by an individual, organization, or even for a country you can measure, right? So the country-wise scaling is there. So for this country, based on the activities that are happening in the country, what is the level of greenhouse gases that are emitted on average? So by measuring that, you can say, okay, these countries are more economical friendly. These are more damaging. These countries are damaging to the economy a lot, right? So even though there are 6 regulated gases under the greenhouse gases, the CO2 is one of the most influential greenhouse gas for the climate change, right? So that is why we are very much focusing on CO2, right? So CO2 is doing most of the damages. It's most influential to the climate change. Therefore, sometimes when you talk about this carbon footprint, we'll see the greenhouse gases or environmental friendly, we simply refer to the CO2 only, because that is one of the most influential greenhouse gas. Right? So we'll now look at the background of the concept when you say carbon footprint and all. So a little bit of a background. Right? So this concept came into existence as a result of increasing awareness of the need for pollutant control, right? So when we started realizing, because initially when there were less usage of these fossil fuels and less developments and industrial activities taking place, we did not bother that much about the environmental damages these activities would have created. But after some time, there is an increasing awareness. There should be a need to control the pollutions, right? So what happens is, it's one of the outcomes of, we call Kyoto Protocol. It's kind of a treaty, like international agreement, right? Between, initially, I think it was like 192 countries agreed on that, right? So the agreement is basically, what is the agreement is, all the countries decided, okay, they will limit their CO2 emissions within their country setup. And they set up a target for reduction of CO2 by this year, by this percentage, something like that. Right? United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, UNFCCC. So there was the first international law that was brought up to address the climate change, because before that it was not a law, because you can, so if you, what happens, so one country is not adhering and they are doing all the damages to the climate, right? That impact of the climate change is not only for that country, it is for all over the world. Because you can't say that, okay, only Sri Lanka damaged the industry, in the environment, so the disaster will going to happen only in Sri Lanka. That's not going to work like that, isn't it? So, because whoever who is contributing from any part of the world, the impact can be anywhere in the world. So that is how the climate change works. Right? So therefore, the international law, it's mainly to limit the impact because of the climate change. So unless otherwise there is a law, sometimes someone may act very damageful to the environment, which is having an impact, which will have an impact on all other people who have been very considerate to the environment. So therefore, the law, international law to address the climate change was imposed. Right? And that was agreed in 1992 at an Earth Summit in Brazil, right? Rio de Janeiro is a place in Brazil. So the Kyoto Protocol, it's actually established under the convention in 1997, and it came into force in 2005, right? You can see it took some time because there were a lot of countries, and it's not very easy for you to set up a target for carbon emission reduction. Right? So because the protocol created a legally binding emission targets for developing nations. So when you are developing, so you can do your development. So all the factories or whatever the buildings and skyscrapers and massive development can be done, but you have to limit your emissions, carbon emission within that limit. You cannot exceed. So that means your development is allowed provided that you are within the limit of the environmental damages. So that kind of an agreement is called. So it's a legally binding emission targets. So if you go beyond that target, probably you'll have to pay, I don't know, you have to buy some this carbon reduction. So it's kind of a legally binding agreement. So when you set these legally binding targets for industrialized countries to reduce their GHG, that is greenhouse gases emissions, by the end of the first commitment period. So initially, because 2005, it came into force. So they had the initial commitment period is 2018 to 12, right? And then there was in Qatar, there was a follow-up amendment to that Kyoto Protocol, was adopted for a second commitment period for 2013 until 2020, right? I'll find out whether there is any further development after this. Then I will share that as well with you, right? So what you need to understand is it's just it's a treaty, like many people come together on a common agreement, right? So, and it is an international treaty. It's not like something a group of people do. It's a group of countries, right? And 192 countries is not like a small number, isn't it? Right? So what they have is they had a target, right? So this is an earlier, during the first commitment period, 2018-20, that is the target. So target is by 2022, relative to 1990. So when you compare to the carbon emission in 1990, so there should be a 5.2 reduction. Right? So that is something that we need to, because the reason for the existence is because then people started measuring that the carbon footprint concept came because of this, right? Otherwise, there is no need to measure, isn't it? if you don't have to have a target, or if you don't have a target to achieve, why do you have to bother, or why do you have to measure carbon emission? Right? So here it shows that 192 countries, and they have the legend as well, signed and ratified. Ratified in the sense they have a, legally a formal consent. If you have a legal contract, legal agreement, so that's ratified. So the orange ones are ratified but withdrawn, and these countries are signed but not ratified. So likewise, they have so this is the picture that I managed to get. So what I want you to understand through these slides is because of the Kyoto Protocol, the carbon footprint measurement, the concept of carbon footprint came actually through initiated by this protocol, right? So during the first commitment period, which is 2018 to 2012, 37 industrialized countries and economies in transition and the European community committed to reduce GHG emissions to average of 5% against 1990 levels. During the second commitment period, parties committed to reduce GHG emissions by at least 18% below the 1990 levels in the 8-year period from 2019 to 30. However, the composition of parties in the second is different from the first because it's an agreement. No? So the first agreement is 190. These parties are not the same in the second. Probably there will be addition or some dropouts as well. But if you look at the target, earlier they think, okay, 5% is okay. And then later they have lifted up the target to 18%. That means that because of our industrial activities and our day-to-day developments, the emissions is huge. Therefore, the target to reduce is also less. Okay, so you can see how they are acting. Okay, so and by looking at the figure, the increasing in the target reduction, the percentage to reduce the carbon they have put up the target. Why they have put up the target? Because they realize there are too much of emission during the period. So when you are getting along the line, when the latest years comes, a number of activities, the industry developments by all the countries are also developing more rapidly. Therefore, the damage to the environment is also too rapid. So you have to set up a higher target in order to make it to the. So during this period and this is actually 2008 to 12, right? 2008 to 12, 5%, they think, okay, 5% reduction is okay. But when it's come to during this period, the 5% is not a achievable reduction. So they have increased it to 18%. Okay. So this is, I just showed you just as a background so that you can understand what is the carbon footprint. The measurement the concept came into existence. Mainly, there is a need to reduce the pollutants in the air, in the environment. And after that concept, the Kyoto Protocol is one of the main, the first established measure. Okay. So the carbon footprint definition. So these are the definitions. So we have already looked at what is carbon footprint. What do you understand by that? These are like technical definition. It's a measure of the exclusive total amount of carbon dioxide emissions that is directly and indirectly caused by an activity or is accumulated over the life stages of a product. Right? It can be one activity or it can be throughout the project. So product, say for example, if you want to say, okay, how much of carbon footprint is needed in order to produce we'll say a car or a garment. We'll say a garment, a dress, right? Then what you do is, if you want to just say that you have to think about the life stages of the product, right? So the outcome will be a garment, right? So you have a garment at the end, but before that you have to start with the raw material, right? So you have to start with the raw material, and then in order to convert that into the final product, whatever the activities and cycles that you are going through, everything is considered and calculated, right? Because extracting raw material is going to create some damages to the CO2, right? To the environment. And when you are converting them into further units, right? And then you put it in the manufacturing, the factory, and then until to the raw material to clothing, it will be taken, and from the clothing to the garment. And again, you have to use a lot of machineries, and so the garment factories are running based on using a lot of energies, right? So for that particular product, how much of energy efficiency is used? How much of carbon footprint is used? You can calculate. Right? So you can see some books or the exercise books. When you look at the exercise books inside, they write it, okay, no tree is cut to produce this book. Something like that. Sometimes they promote, okay, usually you cut the tree and in order to produce papers and all, but there are other ways of producing papers. So some companies are promoting their products. Okay, it is environmental friendly. So when you use that, the book itself, it's written, no tree is cut during the process of producing this book. So that means the carbon footprint is quite less there because they have used other methods to produce that rather than from the traditional way. In other definition, it says it's a methodology to estimate the total emission of greenhouse gases in carbon equivalent form, in carbon equivalents from a product across its life cycle, from the production of a raw material used in its manufacture to disposal and finished product. So that's what I have already mentioned here. Starting from the raw materials used, and then in its manufacture, and then also the disposal of the finished product. That means it is taking the complete life cycle of the product, right? You are extracting from the raw material and you are manufacturing and making a product. After the product, then finally, after the use of, there is a duration for every product will have several duration, right? Certain products can stay forever, for a long time. Certain products, the duration is only few months or few years, right? So starting from the raw material and then the intermediate products, so the manufacturing process, and also the end of life of the product. At the end of life, what you are doing, again, there is a measurement that can be done at the end of the life, right? For example, so when you are disposing something, whether you are just dumping or whether you are burning it or whether you are reusing it or recycling it, when you're recycling anything without disposing it, or we are reusing for a different purpose, then your carbon footprint is minimized there because you're not damaging that. But instead of that, when you burn that, we don't want it anymore, you're burning it. Then it will contribute to the carbon footprint. So the disposal of a finished product is also matters how it is going to contribute. Okay. So do you have any questions? So far what we have done is we have just understood the definition of a carbon footprint, right? After talking about the sustainable development and the global warming and the impact and the fossil fuel, and burning fossil fuel creates so many different gases, where the CO2 is the most influential gas, and measuring the CO2 emission or how much CO2 is emitted through your activity or a product is called the carbon footprint. Okay. So the next is we are going to look at the types of carbon footprint. There are two main categories like primary and secondary. And then other categories are, it can be individual basis, organizational basis, likewise, activity basis, event basis, something like that. Okay, so that is the next part.
Recording stopped.
Okay, do you need a break, like 10 minutes? Can I give you 10 minutes break? Just a convenient break for you to. Okay, so we'll 22. Okay, take a small break then, 10 minutes, okay? No need to leave the meeting, just relax and take your eyes away from the computer and walk around and come back, okay?
Recording in progress. Recording stopped.
Okay, hope I can continue. Can I?
Recording in progress.
Shall we continue?
Okay, madam.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so here we look at the types of carbon footprint, right? So the carbon footprint can be classified into two main categories. One is primary carbon footprint and secondary carbon footprint, right? And that is the major categories, primary and secondary. And in addition, there are other ways of categorizing carbon footprint, something like individual, organization-based, etc. Right? So if you want to measure the carbon footprint of an individual person, then we can call it as an individual carbon footprint. Or if you wanted to do a carbon footprint as an organization as a whole, all the staff, all the activities related to the organization that are taking place within the organization, you measure the carbon emission and then calculate that as a footprint for an organization, right? Even for an event. So if, for example, if you are organizing a seminar, a 2-day seminar, then you calculate that duration of the seminar and from where the participants are coming, right? There are a lot of people coming from abroad. Then the carbon footprint for that seminar is high because everyone is using air travel, right? So air travel give you the higher carbon emission there, right? So then that seminar, so when you organize a seminar virtually, then the carbon footprint is comparatively less. Likewise, you can categorize the carbon footprint calculations for a particular entity or an event or an organization. The large way of classifying is that within the organization or within the individual also, these two categories will be there. The primary way, the secondary carbon footprint. Okay. So when you say primary carbon footprint, what does that mean is, it is a measure of our direct emissions. Directly you are burning the CO2. Right? So direct emission of CO2 from the burning of fossil fuels, including domestic energy consumption and transportation. Give me a second. Thank you. Okay, so the direct emissions mean the primary means direct emissions of CO2 by burning the fossil fuel, right? So, for example, the transport, right? The primary footprint covers the carbon emission in any which individual organization has direct responsibility for direct control. So, the primary carbon footprint is you have a direct responsibility and you can directly control. Say, for example, the transport, the vehicle, right? So you can decide whether you want to walk or whether you want to take a car, right? If you take a car, you are burning the fossil fuel, the petrol directly, and it has a carbon CO2 emission, right? But you can control that as well now. So you can decide, okay, I'm not going to take a car. I'm going to walk. I'm going to take a bicycle, or I'm going to go with my friend who is anyway going that way. Likewise, you can control the emission of the carbon. Right? So you have the direct responsibility because you are deciding whether you want to use the car or not. So if you have decided not to use the car, then you have a responsibility in directly controlling the emission. Right? So that is called the primary carbon footprint, which it's a measure of all the direct emissions of CO2. Right? So the examples are all the natural gas, the oil, the LPG or coal, or all the natural gas or directly the fossil fuels are used. That are when you are burning that, then that is a direct emission. Right? So, for example, the vehicle travel, which we have already looked at, whether it's a private or a public, there is a direct emission. Right? Direct use of electricity. Right? Certain electricity that you cannot actually control. We'll see that you are in an office. There's a central air conditioning system. So you cannot actually control whether to switch off or switch it on, the AC or not. But certain thing, the direct use of electricity you can control. It's like switching on the light in your cabin. So that's kind of a direct use of electricity, right? That you can have the control, and that is your primary carbon emission. So if you want to reduce the carbon emission, you can switch off, right? And flying to work or to holiday, that's again comes with the travel. So all these things have a control. The person who is utilizing, have a direct responsibility to utilize or to control the carbon emission there. Secondary carbon emission, also secondary carbon footprint mean it's a measure of the indirect CO2 emission from the whole life cycles of the product. Right? So you cannot have a direct emission there. It's an indirect emission. Right? So when there is an indirect emission, so it's a measure of CO2 given out that is not under the individual or organizational control by products consumed, however, indirectly responsible. Right? Say, for example, you are buying something. You are buying a toothpaste, or you are buying a garment. Right? So by buying that, you are going to use that anyway. Right? So you're not directly, burning any CO2 there by buying a toothpaste, for example. But you're indirectly contributing, because in the production process of the toothpaste, the fossil fuel are burned already. Right? So before they come to the market as a toothpaste, which is packed and priced, it has incurred a lot of CO2 emissions, isn't it? So by buying those products from a shop, you are indirectly contributing, right, to the CO2 emission, which used in the production process or the life cycle of the product, right? But the issue there is, or the feature there is, in the secondary carbon footprint, you as a person who is buying the end product do not have the control over the CO2 emission there. Right? Because you did not influence the manufacturing process of the toothpaste, isn't it? So what you did was you only bought that. But you cannot always, put the 100% blame on the manufacturers, because they manufacture because you are going to buy it. You are the one who is going to use it. Therefore, you are indirectly responsible. Right? So that is why you say you are indirectly. You cannot say that you are not responsible at all, because you are using and you are buying. They produce various things in the market. There are a lot of different products available because people are consuming it. If no one is consuming it, they are not producing. So when you are consuming something, that we become responsible for those. So all the carbon emission that are associated with that kind of a product or production process of that kind of products that we are consuming, we become indirectly responsible. Right? Okay, so the secondary carbon footprint is the measure of indirect CO2 emission using the whole life product, right? So that can be associated with the manufacture and the eventual breakdown. Right? So you can say the breakdown from the life cycle of the product. Right? Example, the transportation of the product. So you are the transportation will become a primary carbon footprint if you are using your own transport to travel, right? You are taking your car to your office, then it is a primary carbon footprint because you have the control whether to go and use it or. But say, for example, if you are going to buy some groceries from a shop, right? But from the manufacturing or the production point to the retail point, the shopkeepers should bring the stuff in a lorry or a container or whatever, right? So when they do the transportation of the products, that burned a lot of CO2, that burned a lot of fossil fuel and CO2 emission is producing, right? But you are not responsible for that. You cannot directly control, but you are buying the product, you are indirectly contributing, right? And the waste. So the greenhouse gases emission from the waste. And the greenhouse gases emission from the use and end of life phases of products and services. Waste in the sense, sometimes when you're buying certain things, then certain wastes are unavoidable, So it comes with the packs and all. Even though you want only the product, right? It comes in several packs. So we'll assume that you're buying a laptop, right? So when you open it, they don't just give you the laptop as it is. They will put it in a box. And inside the box, there are small plastic bags, whether they put the charger separately and the several small parts separately. So everything will come with the package, right? But only thing is you need only the laptop, but the packages, including the plastic and all, then you dump it or you burn it, you waste it, right? So you're not directly responsible for that because you cannot avoid that. You cannot control that. You can't just say, I don't want any of these bags or packing. You only give me the laptop. You cannot ask like that. And the emission from the use and end of life phases of products and services. So that is when at the time of the disposal, certain things you buy it and after the use, you have to dispose it. You cannot recycle. You cannot control whether it is possible to recycle or reuse or anything because at the time you buy the product, you know whether it is recyclable or not. Okay. Certain products you cannot recycle. Right? So you have to dump it or you have to dispose it. So in the process of disposal, the end of life phases, when there are the CO2 emissions, then those are secondary carbon footprint. And not only the transportation of the products is after manufacturing. Once the products are made, you transport it from the factories to the retail places. But when it's come to before the products are made, right? The CO2 is there from the production and the distribution of it. Even during the production process also, there are a lot of energy wasted. Okay, so that is another example for the secondary carbon footprint. Give me a second. And certain imported food, if you look at it, certain things that we want, some medicines, right? It is essential for us, but it's not available locally. So we must import those medicine from Australia or wherever the medicines are produced. Or some food. It's only imported. Certain kind of fruits and certain foods are imported. So we all are consuming those medicines and food, but we are not directly burning any CO2 emission there by buying those. But in the process of importation, it involves the air travel and all, so a lot of carbon emission is considered, right? And the packages, when you say ready meals, bottled water, drinks, right? So these days it has become a fashion to drink water in a mineral water bottle, right? So by doing that, what we are doing is we are contributing to the CO2 emission, right? Because every single time when you are buying a mineral water, so you're using the water and you are throwing the bottle. What will happen is it will finally ended up as a waste, and it's not a waste which is decomposable. So it will damage the environment. Okay. So that is so can you understand the difference between the primary carbon footprint and secondary carbon? So by definition, what it means, the primary is, one is the direct burning is involving, but here also the direct burning is involving, right? Transportation of products. But where do you call that as a primary carbon footprint? Even though there's a direct burning, you or the organization or whoever who is belong there should have the control to reduce the carbon emissions, then it is a primary one. The secondary one are the indirect CO2 emissions, where the individual or organization, it's not there under their control, right? So the emission is something, but still you're responsible indirectly. Therefore, that is called secondary carbon footprint. Okay. Do you have any questions? Okay, then we will move on to the purpose of carbon footprint calculation, right? As an organization, there are typically two main reasons for calculating the carbon footprint, right? Why, as an organization, why do you have to calculate in the first place the carbon footprint, right? One is the manage the footprint and reduce the emission. If we don't calculate the footprint, we cannot manage. If we want to reduce the carbon emissions, we should know how much we produce. Without knowing how much we emit, we cannot reduce. Therefore, it is necessary for the organization to calculate the carbon footprint, mainly to manage the footprint and reduce the emission over time. So that is one main reason. One of the main reasons is to manage the footprint to reduce. The other main reason is to report the footprint accurately at a third party or public reporting, right? As I mentioned about this, the book, that some books are made out 100%. Some books, they write it like 100% recyclable. So that means, so when you are using the book, you are writing the exercise books, you're finishing it. After that, you don't have to burn. You don't have to do anything because it's 100% recyclable, means that you can simply recycle. So what they're trying to tell this through their product, it is 100% recyclable in the sense that you can recycle it and therefore it is environmental friendly. So they're trying to brand their product in such a way so that it is more environmental friendly. So the people who are environmental considerate, or those who are nature-friendly people, they would like to, even pay more money and buy that kind of a product rather than buying a product which ended up in a waste, right? So that's like accurately they are reporting to the public, right? So some products, they are using the information in the product itself. Okay, so that is the main purposes. So how do we do that is one, there are 3 points that you need to consider. One is, first they need to set a target for reducing, because when you say, okay, you have to plan reduce the emissions over time, but without having a target, you cannot do it, right? So the very first thing that you need to do is set a target for reducing. Okay, by next year or in 5 years' time, we have to reduce the carbon emission by this much. Likewise, they have to set up a target first, right? And then identify which activities contribute to the footprint. Because when you look at the organization, there are a lot of different activities, right? Depending on what type of organization it is, right? So certain organization, most of the activities are consuming energy. Every activity you're using a machinery or lighting or something. Certain organization, there are a lot of things that are done manually. Some only for the transport, they are using the energy. Something like that. It depends on organization to organization. Depends on what type of products that you are producing, what type of organization it is, whether it is a production organization or it's a consultant service, it's a construction organization, it's a contractors. What type of activity that you are dealing with. Then you have to identify which activity that has most contributing to the footprint. Then you have to think about that activity. You don't have to just work on, redoing all the activities in a different manner. That is not possible. That is not practical, probably. But if you can identify, okay, these are the key activities that are hugely contributing this carbon footprint, then you can see, okay, how efficiently you can do this activity without, making that much contribution to carbon footprint, or in a better manner, in a more environmental friendly manner, how we can do it. So in order for you to find out that, you need to know what are the activities that are contributing most to a footprint. Right? So you have to calculate that mainly to set a target and also to identify which activities. So it's easier for you to then, when you calculate only, you can see, okay, this, when you are after calculating the carbon footprint, you can easily run through the calculation. Okay, these activity 1, 3, and 5, yeah, these activities are contributing more. Then you can do something about it. Right? And also the organizations are calculating carbon footprint to measure changes in emission over time and to monitor the effectiveness and reduction activities, because you have already set a target, right? And you find out what are the activities that contribute the most, right? Target is set, the activities contribute to the most, it's found out, then what? Then you have to see, okay, you have to monitor. So if your target is reducing the carbon emission in 5 years, over the 5 years, how the emission pattern has changed, right? So when you reduce the activities that contribute most to the footprint, how you can reduce, what is the effectiveness of that, whether you have achieved the target or whether you are approaching in achieving the target. So in order to do that, you have to continuously monitor that as well. So when footprinting for management of emission, so having quantified the emission, opportunities for reduction can be identified and prioritized. As I mentioned earlier, why do you have to manage? If you have to manage the emissions, you have to quantify the emission. If you don't know how much you are producing or how much emissions that you are producing, how are you going to manage? Right? So once you have quantified, then the opportunities for reduction can be identified and prioritized. Then you can see, okay, these are the opportunities you can reduce. And what is the priority? Which one to be tackled first? Right? So you have to give more focus on the areas of greatest savings potential, right? There might be hundreds of activities. There are maybe 3 activities which is contributing nearly 80% of your carbon footprint, right? So rather than working on these 97 activities, probably you can target the activity which is contributing the highest carbon footprint, right? So because that has the greatest savings potential, right? So that's how you have to manage the emissions. Right? So that is the first purpose, the footprinting for managing, or to manage the footprint to reduce. And to accurate reporting, that you have a responsibility. The organizations increasingly want to calculate their carbon footprint in detail for public disclosure. Because now the people are also demanding various products, whether they are environmental friendly. Because when we are even building a house, now we are going with a green concept, energy efficiency, recyclable, less wastage, circularity of the products and components of a building. Likewise, even the clients are more knowledgeable now towards the sustainable environment. So they demand now various products. They don't just simply buy, because they wanted to know whether this was done giving enough consideration for the sustainable environment. Right? So they wanted to publicly disclose it. It's a marketing as well as good for the environment. Right? For marketing purposes, they are doing it. There's a CSR, the corporate social responsibility purposes. So as a organization, they have a social responsibility to tell the public or whoever who are using their products how the product was made, what minimum damage it has given to the environment. Right? So to fulfill the request from businesses or retail customers or from investors, sometimes the investors will be more interested to invest on your organization or your product. If they realize, okay, these products are very environmental friendly, then probably you will get more investors. You can seek more investors. So that is one of the marketing purpose. You have to calculate the footprint, accurately reporting purposes. Right? So what level of emissions they need to offset in order to become carbon neutral? Okay. So offsetting the carbon is like you're buying the carbon reduction. So therefore you will get carbon neutral. So it is a concept actually. So it's not practical. So say for example, so you are producing something and you cannot avoid the carbon emission through the production process. You are producing carbon emission like that, right? But what you are doing is you are contributing to the carbon reduction somewhere else in the world by purchasing the carbon reduction. It is kind of an investment. It is kind of a contribution. So in order to, you're contributing to the carbon reduction activity for somewhere else. Right? So probably we'll say that you're producing the carbon emissions in Sri Lanka, but by purchasing or contributing the carbon reduction activities around the world somewhere, maybe you are supporting a program, an environmental support program, they are trying to reduce the carbon emission. Right? What you are trying to do is, you are just trying to console yourself because you cannot reduce the carbon emission through the production process because that is necessary. But in order to satisfy yourself, what you do is you increasing the carbon, but you're trying to reduce or you're trying to contribute a carbon reduction activity somewhere else. So ultimately, when you consider the earth as a whole, your carbon reduction is neutral. Because you're increasing here, you are trying to reducing somewhere else. That's clear for you. So that's usually happens. Some organization, they purchase this carbon reduction activity. So they contribute that carbon reduction activities. Right? It's kind of an offsetting, as because you cannot reduce here, you are trying to reduce somewhere else, which is possible. This is not possible. Reducing here is not possible, but contributing to reduce somewhere else is possible. By doing so, you are sort of becoming carbon neutral. Right? Because whatever the carbon that you produce, it's going to affect the whole earth. Right? So it doesn't really matter whether you reduce at your organizational level. Anywhere in the world, if you can reduce, that is again carbon reduction. Okay. So the final topic is the different types of assessment of carbon footprint assessment. You can, as we have already looked at the two types like primary and secondary, primary carbon footprint and secondary. So other categories are based on the individual organization and etc. So the assessment here is there are different types based on that categories, right? You can do the carbon footprint assessment for an organization. Okay. And you can do the assessment for an individual. You can self-assess yourself how much carbon footprint that you are making in your day-to-day activity. It can be for a product, it can be for a service, or it can be for an event, like I mentioned, a seminar or a conference that you organize. And different types of footprint have different methods and different boundaries. Obviously, the different footprint will have different methods and different boundaries as well. Okay. So these are the different types of carbon footprint assessments. So we will go through the at least a couple of assessment, probably. Only a few more slides to go, so I think I can complete within the few minutes. So when you say organizational assessment, it involves quantifying the direct and indirect emission associated with an organization. So we have already talked about how the assessment, how the activities are identified, whether then you can say the direct, whether it's a direct emissions or indirect emission, whether you can have a control over reducing it or not. Likewise, you can identify which activity is contributing more carbon footprint and all. So you quantify the direct and indirect emissions. Right? The direct emissions are those from the combustion of fossil fuel in equipment, vehicles owned by the organization, and also the escape greenhouse gases from the organizational facility. So what you produce because of the operation of the organization, if you produce some greenhouse gases, right, that is also come under direct emission, or all the equipment that you are using, the vehicles that you own by the organization, the transport and all equipment, in the sense, all the machineries that you are using. When you're running those machineries, the direct emissions of fuel burning. Indirect emissions are emissions which are the result of an organization's activities, but which are emitted from facilities or vehicles owned by third parties. Right? So for the organization, after completing the production, probably you ask your retailers to come and collect it. Right? Then they all come with their containers and lorries. They all contributing to the indirect emission. From your organization, for them it is a direct emission, right? Whoever who is driving those lorries, it's a direct emission for them. But when you are doing the organizational assessment, you don't have a control over their driving and their emissions, CO2 emissions, isn't it? So therefore, but you are indirectly responsible because they are coming to you in order to collect it. Right? So that is your indirect emission. Likewise, you have to assess the direct and indirect emission associated with your organizational activity. When it's come to the individual, it can be calculated by set of CO2 emission, which cost again direct and indirect by an individual. So the same thing, earlier we looked for an organization, here we are looking at for an individual. different lifestyles of humans could emit CO2 differently. As I have already explained, some people are there, just they will take car for every single travel, even if they have to walk just two roads down, they take the car and go. That's kind of their lifestyle. So, okay, that kind of a lifestyle, it have more CO2 emission. So some people, they are very considerate about environment. So what they do is they walk for most of the places, or they take the public transport. They don't unnecessarily take the car out unless otherwise it is necessary. Right? It all depends on the lifestyle. And it can be a personal choice, and the collective choice may also have an enormous impact. Sometimes you have the personal choice, whether you are very much into the environment friendly nature person and all. Sometimes when you are in a family, probably you don't have any other choices but to sometimes order, meals, or sometimes you don't want to order meals out. But if your children's prefer, sometimes your parents prefer, what you do is, okay, we will order the food today. And what will happen is you are incurring indirectly, you are contributing to a transfer. If you order through Pick Me or Uber Eats, then they'll have to travel and they'll have to deliver to your house. So you're making them travel and emit the CO2 because of your order. So you're indirectly responsible. Likewise, the collective choices and individual choices can have different impact on the CO2 emission, right? All human activities cause CO2 emission, as I mentioned earlier. Using all the fabrics and, all the day-to-day things that you're using contribute to CO2 emission. Therefore, every person is responsible, right? Product assessment is the production process, right? We talk about the organization. You can see you can imagine the organization sitting there. The individual is, you can imagine yourself. So you can self-assess how much of CO2 you're producing, or because of your activity you're producing. So then you assess that. So that is down to the individual. When it comes to the product, it is a manufacturing of a product, right? So it's all quantifying all the emission associated with the product. Okay, so it actually coming from the cradle to customer, right? So you're producing something. When you're producing a garment or a computer or a car, whatever. So from the raw material and through the manufacturing and the production process. And once the production is done, then you're transporting that to the retailers. And then when a customer comes and purchase that product from the shop, until that point, this is your responsibility. After customer purchase, probably it will become an assessment for them, right? Some products, probably you can even consider for the whole of the life. Even after the customer purchase, you are still in touch with them. You are doing regular maintenance and everything. And until the disposal of the product, you are still responsible. Responsible in the sense you are responsible for the CO2 emission, right? So includes the cradle to customer. It includes all emissions from the extraction of the raw material, processing, manufacturing, delivery to the retailers, customers, or maybe for the whole of life, depending on your connection with the product. So this may cover all the emission sources for cradle to customer and the emission associated with customer use and final disposal of the product as well, as we mentioned, right? So this is kind of a cradle to customer. As I mentioned, extraction of the raw material, manufacture and distribution. So once the customer purchases, then your responsibility, you can say, okay, you are done with your responsibility now. It is now the customer's responsibility to look after the product and maintain the CO2. Or the cradle to end of life emission is you take the same process, extraction, manufacture, distribution, while they are using and until they dispose. You take the calculate the carbon footprint of that product. So that is cradle to end of life emission assessment. So those are the major assessment, like the organization, individual and product, right? Other assessment can be for events, which I have already mentioned about, whether you are organizing an event in person, physically or virtually, it totally have a huge different or impact on the CO2 emission. Any services that you do, the websites, journeys, or even for an example, comparing the emission from sending a letter by post with those associated with sending the letter by email. Because when you send a letter by post, depending on how far you are from the post office and what are you have to use an envelope, you have to use a stamp and gum, glue. So all involves the CO2 emissions. And then through the post, it goes to, whatever the way. The air, if it is abroad, then it should involve the air travel as well. Right? So same message delivered through an email, it is probably the carbon emission is comparatively less because whatever the email at the sending point and the receiving point, probably you are using the computer for a few minutes to draft the email and send the email. Okay, so during that time, in order to deliver the communication from one point to another, using a post and sending an email, you can compare. Okay, the same activity, same message. All you want is to message delivered to someone else, right? Whether you are doing through a post or whether you want to make through an email, how much difference it can create in terms of the carbon footprint you can assess. Okay? So, in order to quantify all these activities, other type of assessment, the principles are the same. Inclusion of direct and indirect emission for defined scope of activity, whether it is organizational, whether it is individual, whether it's a product basis or event basis, or even a small activity. All you need to find out is what are the direct emission, what are the indirect emission, and what is the scope of activity. Okay, so those principles will be the same across all the different types of assessment. Okay, so with that, we are concluding our main session for today. Right, so that is about the concept of carbon footprint and carbon emission we have covered, the types of carbon footprint and assessment, right? And carbon reduction strategies, I'll again revisit this. There are partly we have talked about it, but we can talk about it more. Something like buying the carbon offsets and all. And the project management part will be done tomorrow. Do you have any questions? You have no questions? Okay, if you don't have any questions, then we will conclude the session for today. It's like 10 minutes spare, but I think I'm done. Right? So tomorrow you have lecture from 7 to 10, right? So my lecture is from 7 to 10 using the same link. Okay?
Recording stopped.
Okay, so I think there's no question. So we can wind up for today's session. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Menaha.
You're welcome.